Okay, well, good afternoon. We're ready to get started. So if you could grab your food and drinks and come into the conference room. Good afternoon. My name is Yun Sun, and I'm the co-director of the East Asia program here at Stimson Center. Thanks to everybody who made it to the event today despite the horrible weather outside. Whenever or wherever there is a discussion about North Korea, it's either about the nuclear issue, about denuclearization, or about the traditional narrative about the dictatorship and human rights abuse inside North Korea. So while people agree that North Korea is also evolving, the country is changing and it's evolving, we rarely get a clear sense as for what is changing, for what reason, and more importantly, changing towards what end. We also talk about the burgeoning market economy, the black market economy inside North Korea. We talk about elite politics, or even the factional politics inside North Korea, as well as the internal social control in the country. But we also rarely get a glimpse on how these changes affect the threat perception of the North Korean regime, hence the goals and approaches the government has adopted. In other words, we have a lot of questions about what is changing inside North Korea. But we also have the question, what are the political and security implications of these social changes inside North Korea? And that is the specific topic that we have set out to tackle today. To answer these questions, we have had the honor to rally three top experts on this topic. We have Dr. Zheng Jiyong from Fudan University. We have Professor William Overholt from Harvard. And we have Jenny Tang from Stimson Center. So just to give you a brief introduction, Dr. Zheng Jiyong is a professor and a director at the Center for Korean Studies at Fudan University in Shanghai, and also the Secretary General of the Shanghai Institute of Korean Studies. He is currently a visiting fellow at Stimson Center with our East Asia program. His research focuses on domestic politics in the two Koreas, bilateral and multilateral relations related to the Korean Peninsula, and the policy-making processes in the DPRK, ROK, and China. So Dr. Zheng Jiyong has had the luxury or the opportunity to visit DPRK basically every year consecutively. So he's probably one of the few people in this room who has visited the country on a regular basis and can give us a very clear picture as for what has been changing inside the country. Then secondly, we're going to have Professor Overholt, who is a senior research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Professor Overholt has extensive experience in research at the RAND Corporation and the Hudson Institute, consulting and investment banking in the US and across Asia. He's the author of 6 books, including Asia, America, and the Transformation and Geopolitics. Last but not least, we have our own Jenny Tang, who is a fellow at Stimson Center and the managing editor and the producer of 30 North, a web journal which I'm sure everybody in this room knows about, that provides policy and technical analysis on North Korea. She is a former assistant director of USKI, where she focused on North Korea, US DPRK relations, US ROK alliance, and Northeast Asia regional security. And also, she was named one of the Fast Company's most creative people in business in 2019 for her role in co-founding and managing 30 North. So her creativeness definitely has made our East Asia program much more productive than before. So for the proceedings today, we're hoping to begin with Professor Zheng's presentation on social changes in North Korea, followed by Professor Overholt's remarks on how these social changes affect the regime's calculation and its nuclear strategy. And then we'll wrap up with Jenny's comments on how such chain effects influence the denuclearization process. So I understand that Professor Zheng has a very extensive PowerPoint presentation. And we would like to ask you not to take photos of the PowerPoint, especially some of the photos included in the PowerPoint, because some of the photos have never been disclosed before, and there is some political sensitivity involved in it. So if I see somebody taking photos, I'll point you out. So Professor Zheng, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Yuan. I'm Jing Zheng. I'm very grateful to my friend here and to Professor Bill and Tom. And today I will talk about the North Korean society and it changed in the current period. But first I want to explain that I'm from China. I want to emphasize that I'm not a pro-North Korea scholar. I want to talk about explain that what changes in North Korea at now and in this current period. So do not name me a so-called pro-DPRK scholar. I will try my best to explain that the most objective and a true DPRK and its society to you all. And I want to try my best to explain and give a better understanding of what the current situation in DPRK is. And before my presentation, I would like to explain several questions. One is that what we knew is really a real DPRK, and the second is that how does Kim Jong-un dominate DPRK now? And the third is that how does Kim Jong-un and North Korea people live? And the fourth is, I think I will briefly to explain that China play a North Korean card. And you can see the pictures. This picture is taken from Pyongyang in this July. I think if you see that, you can say, is it a real or some kind of North Korean propaganda? It's so beautiful. It is very, very different from our views.
No photos, please.
Oh. And you can see videos that are taken from Pyongyang in July. You can see this Pyongyang and Kaesong City, and Kim Il-sung Stadium, and the 5-1 Stadium. And I think that in the descriptions of DPRK, all kinds of negative terms such as hereditary, assassinations, executions, starvations, nuclear weapons, etc., have become keywords of DPRK now. This is the basic image that I think a small and a long time isolated state could project. And it is also basic imagination. The outside world is willing to project on DPRK now. I think the reason can be concluded into three. One is that North Korea's survival philosophy, that is, it is using the so-called mysticism to control his people and to control foreigners and to have a very good, very better negotiation tactic. And the second one is that, as we all know, now DPRK and ROK is now in a very, very big and huge regime competition. This every image from ROK of DPRK are, I have said that, assassination and execution and starvation. But as we all know, from North Korea views, oh no, is that? No, sorry. The imagination of USA and ROK are very, very bad. but we cannot believe that, we cannot trust that everything from ROK is true and everything from DPRK is true. So we should treat them so objectively. So the third reason is that the mass media's greedy are distorting North Korea's imagination for us. As we all know, when a dog bites a man, that is not new, a big news. But when a man bites a dog, that is big news. So we can see that everything from the newspapers and the internet, they are very, very negative. Especially in China, you can find something about the Kim Jong-un's names in China is very, very bad. We Chinese netizens, they named Kim Jong-un as some chubby boy, as some fat boys, because as in China you cannot humiliate one country's leader in China, but for DPRK it is special. You cannot imagine that. And I think, so what is the real DPRK? As we all know, we from a Western political science textbook, the North Korea is some kind of so-called the political definition of the state or country. But from my personal view, North Korea is not so kind of the classic Western political textbooks so-called state. It is a semi-religious and a semi-organization for us. If you can analyze the problems from the DPRK with the different views from the Western classic physics, the political definition of the state, you can understand DPRK more. So we can say that in DPRK, the governing ideology is how to say can be in made of several ones. One is Kim Il-sung's father's, Kim Il-ji's the Christian theories, and the communist theories, and the traditional Joseon dynasties, shamanism, and feudalism. They are all kind of ideology. They made up the current DPRK. So when you analyze DPRK's problem, you can analyze them from these ideologies. So and another one is that North Korea's elites. We always said in DPRK they only have the royal family of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un. But I think that the royal family, which is named as the Baekdu bloodline, has its special content. It is you can see very, very complicated. I think that the royal family, it is extending and extended for every time. Now, I think the Baekdu-san bloodline can be made up of the several parts and several layers. The first layer, and I think it is in the core of the Baekdu-san bloodline. It is the Kim's family, and in other layer, I think that it can be analyzed by this. I think now it is extend the Baekdusan bloodline is extending now. Now I think in DPRK the governing elites should be more than several millions. This can explain that why DPRK, we often say that DPRK will be collapsed sometime, but DPRK collapsed for almost 30 years, but it is DPRK now. So several million people in DPRK are the North Korean elites. So they are in the one same boat. So the DPRK will not collapse so easily. And the second part that now, how Kim Jong-un dominates the DPRK now, I think I would like to point to have several points. One point is that we can leave the governance from Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il and to Kim Jong-un. The leap of governing philosophy and regime legitimacy is changing now. For Kim Il-sung, it is the father and the national hero of one which fighting for the Korean people and establishing the DPRK and the Korean People's Army and the Korean Workers' Party. It is the father of DPRK. So his legitimacy is for that the hero of DPRK. And for Kim Jong-il, because as we know, in 1990s, DPRK was very, very dangerous. So Kim Jong-il put the army in the first place and the so-called Sengun policy, military first policy, to save the DPRK in very, very dangerous situation. So for Kim Jong-un, he has nothing to do. He should do something different from his father and his grandfather. So he should do something very, very different from Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. So he should say, DPRK, from his views, he thinks that DPRK is not a normal state. He should normalize the DPRK to a very, very normal state. And the second one is that he should feed the people. You should let the people always in the famine. No, you cannot do that. So the world trend and the situation in DPRK make Kim Jong-un to think more than his father and his grandfather. So he made the so-called Beijing policy. At the same time, he should develop the economy to feed the people and to let the North Koreans to live more better. And the second one is that he should keep his powerful nuclear bomb and army. So I think that Kim Jong-un era is some kind of the beginning of North Koreans' normalization as a normal state. And the second one is that how does Kim Jong-un build a new DPRK? He made several ways. One is that he controls the DPRK politically very, very strict. The first one is he used the intelligent politics to control the people. And you can see that he made the people, you have no energy, you have no more thought, and you have no more time to gather and have some kind of the rebellion. And the foreigners in DPRK now, you can do nothing now because North Koreans can identify you as soon as you you walk in the street, because as we know, even you can speak a very, very fluent Korean, and even you can dress North Korean clothes. You can have a badge, but the North Korean can identify you so short in very, very short time, because they have some kind of the ways to identify you. They have the 10 principles, because the internal Korean people, they only know the principles, because foreigners, they don't know that because as you are so suspicious, someone will come close to you. So please recite the second part, the second chapter of the 10 principles. You cannot, so you are a spy. And the second one is that now I think Kim Jong-un, he controlled the DPRK with law and by law. I think Kim Jong-un now, his attention has focused on especially governing the DPRK, ministry open and transparent, and institutionalize the method to change the old ways of the malice of the old man and the army. And the third one is that I think he is to raise the KWP, and he used the party politics to control the society and and the army. The fourth, the fourth one is that I think he's using the Zuci and the faithful officials to tame the army and the old men and the old guys. And the fifth one is that now I think Kim Jong-un, he used some kind of the people politics. He should make he should satisfy the people, and he should raise the livelihood of the people now. And one important thing is that now in DPRK, Kim Jong-un does not make some propaganda for that. He is no longer a god for the Korean people. He is different from his grandfather and father. He is ordinary. In the book, he said that Kim Jong-un is no longer a god, is no longer a fiction. He is now a great ordinary human. And now in their propaganda, they say that Kim Jong-un is the son of the people. You can see very curious thing in DPRK now. Everyone of North Koreans, they call Kim Jong-un father. But Kim Jong-un has named himself as some son of the people. It is very, very curious. Yeah. And the third part is that I think I would like to show you some pictures and movies to see the social and economic changes in DPRK now. And one thing is that as we all know, for the resource element, North Korea is very, very poor. So his dependence of China and Russia is very, very high. So he should depend on it now. And the second one is that one small state and one small he has no resource element. He should open his country to the international society. And now, for how to say that, you can everything you can open, and you can get more. And now Kim Jong-un is pushing some kind of the Beijing line. The first one is achieving the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And the second is the developing the economy at full speed. And I draw a picture of the North Korean economic development roadmap. But we can see that North Korea is very, very dependent on China and the international society. For now, I think if the international society cannot lift the sanctions on DPRK, the development of DPRK will be very, very slow. And one thing I want to point out is as we all know, the professors and the lecturers in North Korea's universities and colleges, the wage is very, very low. You cannot imagine that one professor in DPRK, 1 month, they have only the wage is lower than $1. But you can see the expenditure 1 month is very, very high. But how can they survive? It is a very, very big problem. But we think that they solve the problem with the dual economic system. One is the state-owned and planned the economic system, and one is very, very important for DPRK now. The other one is the market. And these pictures are the ration cards for ordinary people. You can see many kind of cards. For meat and for eggs and for tofu and for noodles. And this is the markets in Pyongyang and other areas and the stores. I think now almost half of the Korean people are involved in the market activities. And I think now there are almost 8 million cell phones in DPRK now, and this is the bus and the tech and the taxis and the bicycles. And the financial system is about $1. It equals 8,000 won. And the pricing, the system is different from us. They have 2, yeah. And the dress, they have no jeans, because the jeans is some kind of symbol of USA. And one thing I want to point out is that North Korea's green production and region, we all know 1 year, the DPRK needs about the 500 ton,
5 million tons.
5 million tons, yeah, greens. But now you can see that the elites can't get the ration green as normal, and the parents they can feed themselves by the greens, but for the city workers they are very, very weak, because the sanctions are not targeted on the North Koreans' nuclear bombs or armies. They are targeting on the city workers. They have no ration, and they have no method and way to get green. And in the era after Kim Jong-un took his office, And Kim Jong-un, their propaganda says that he has several performances. They have the one is politically, they have the theoretical country, and the second is they have a very powerful nuclear bomb, and the third is that they have culturally and economically they have a very big leap, and the fourth is they said Kim Jong Un loved people, and someone these pictures are their propagandas for praise Kim Jong Un. And these videos are taken in this July, and the one is in 2018. And I think now economic change in DPRK in many aspects is very big, but for Kim Jong Un, the economic and social development for Kim Jong Un is a very big dilemma. He has several dilemmas. One is that because as we know, they had ration systems, but now because Kim Jong Un said to the Korean people, you should feed yourself by yourselves. You should not lean on the party. So the loyalty of the Korean people for Kim Jong Un is weakening now, and this is the first one. And the second one is that the dual economic system now has many problems. Now, as we all know, in the Pyongyang station, and in the deep night, you can see many prostitutes, and some they say that they are some kind of non-socialist phenomena. Now they say that these are yellow vans. It's so bad. So this is for very challenging for Kim Jong Un. He should accept the market to solve the problems in DPRK now, especially under the sanctions. But the market and the freedom of the people's how is that the thoughts, he changed everything. I think that the implication for Kim Jong Un have several changes. The first one is that he should do something different from his grandfather and father. He should develop the economic now, but at the same time, the economic development is harmful for his governance. How to solve the problem? The second one is that for Kim Jong Un, because now the opening of the DPRK and his meetings with Xi Jinping and Trump, all based on the North Koreans' denuclearization, because even Trump and President Xi, they trusted in Kim Jong Un saying about the nuclear bombs denuclearization now. But if Kim Jong Un comes back, how can he develop the economic now? And then the third one is that he now North Korean people has tasted the benefits from the opening and the so-called the denuclearization now. But if Kim Jong Un come back, how the North Korean people think about the governance, the governance and the legitimacy of Kim Jong Un? I think these are very big challenges for Kim Jong Un, And the final part is that does China play a diplomatic card? I think I have said here for some times. I will give you one image that this is the different methods between USA and China. You can see that. I think that I took so long time. I will stop here. Thank you all. Yeah.
This is terrific. Love the last part. Well, I'm sure everybody has a lot of questions, but just let's hold our questions, and we should hear Professor Overhaul's and Jenny's assessment first, and then we will go into the questions. And thank you, Professor Zhong, for that very vivid and creative presentation. Professor Overhaul.
Yeah, I think it's on. Can everybody hear? I'm delighted to be here. I'm here with considerable humility. The people who really have a direct understanding of what's going on inside North Korea are here, not here. And this is the home of 38 North, which is where I go to learn about North Korea internationally. What I try to do is to bring some comparative perspective. So we're supposed to connect the nuclear problem to the social changes. What's the connection? Well, the nuclear weapons serve three purposes. One, Kim Jong-un needed the nuclear explosion to give him the prestige to go from being the new child leader to being taken seriously in North Korea. Second, he needed the nuclear explosion to get us to take him seriously. Before the nuclear explosion, a North Korean leader could make a speech and nobody in Washington paid any attention at all. Now we read every word. And the third is it's North Korea's only defense. All its other forms of defense are essentially useless. And Professor Jang can tell you more about that than I can, but I won't go into the details. Now, the first two purposes have been served. The third one is absolutely indispensable. They have no other form of defense. How does that connect to the domestic social situation? Well, you've got this new young leader who'd like to be around and in power for maybe 40 years. And his dad created a total mess. His dad had a more limited time horizon, because for most of his term he was sick. And there was a kind of social bubble in place where they tell the bulk of the North Korean people, oh, we're very well off, and those poor South Koreans and other people in the world, they're so deprived compared with us. Well, that bubble has burst. Most North Koreans understand that life is better in South Korea, life is better in China, life is better in Japan, life is better everywhere. So he's not in the same situation as his father and grandfather. He's got to do something. So he promises the people, we're going to improve the economy. We're going to give you a better life. Byung-jin. Wherever a country has switched to economic priorities and gotten the economics right, that change has consolidated the regime and and proved absolutely irreversible. That's the story of South Korea, that's the story of Taiwan, that's the story of Singapore, that's the story of Indonesia, and that's the story of China. We now call it the China model, but China copied the model from South Korea and Taiwan. But that model's tough to implement in North Korea. First of all, from the time you make very decisive changes, it takes about 3 years before things take off. In South Korea, 1961, 1964. In China, 1979 to 1982. There's some kind of cosmological constant there. But there's a special problem with doing it in such a tiny economy. I was at a conference in New York, and one of my colleagues commented that the North Korean economy is the same size as the economy of Dayton, Ohio. The South Korean economy is the size of the Russian economy, 50 times larger, 50. If you open, you get bought. Samsung can buy North Korea. China can buy North Korea. So you have to be very careful how you open. And while you're waiting for things, wonderful things to happen, that bubble bursts even more. People become even more demanding that you perform. So it's an incredibly difficult thing, even if you're a Nobel Prize winning economist running North Korea, to bring off what he's trying to achieve. The other things he's trying to achieve are even tougher. He, as Professor Cheng mentioned, has to essentially get rid of an old guard that doesn't believe these changes are right and whose personal interests are tied to the old military priorities. He's changing from a system dominated by the military to a system dominated by the party. He's changing the basis of legitimacy from sheer national survival to benefiting the population. He's changing the balance of policies. Now, in political science, we have a word for a situation where we're changing leaders, institutions, the basis of legitimacy, and key policies. That's the definition of revolution. Now, if I tried to make comparable changes in the Stimson Center, I've spent a lot of my career managing think tanks, I'd get incredible pushback. It would be incredibly difficult. To do it in a country is unbelievably difficult. This is a terribly treacherous, dangerous expedition that he's embarked on, economically, politically, socially. The final point I'll make is social sense is about nationalism. Korean nationalism is the most intense of any society on earth. Germany doesn't come close. And this plays into the nuclear problem. First of all, it means if you get peace, and the only way you get to denuclearization is through peace. the policy of trying to get denuclearization by bludgeoning through sanctions is a catastrophic failure. It never had any chance of success. It has no chance of success now. The only way you get to denuclearization is to make the nuclear weapons unnecessary. And that means a peace agreement. If you get a peace agreement, a burst of emotion about pan-Korean feelings, a sense of unification, I think is almost inevitable. Japan simply cannot tolerate the idea of a move toward even peace, never mind unification. They do not want two hostile Koreas to be able to collaborate against them. China's worried about unification because they're afraid it will be a base for the United States. The Pentagon worries about unification because they're afraid that Korea will become a Chinese satellite. I think both are wrong. I think a unified Korea will be nobody's pawn. These are tough people. The other thing about nationalism is it can be the basis of a permanent denuclearization. And there, let me go back to the beginning of my career. In my first book, which is called Asia's Nuclear Future, based on the U.S. government's attempt to stop South Korea's nuclear program. South Korea was in exactly the situation of North Korea today. It was economically inferior to North Korea, it was militarily inferior, and it was more politically unstable. And so Park Chung-hee's people said, we have to have nuclear weapons. And boy, did they make fast progress. Unbelievable how fast they moved. And Nixon put threatened sanctions. We'll take away your diplomatic support, we'll take away the economic aid, and we'll kill the alliance. And that stopped it temporarily, as the same threats stopped the Taiwan nuclear program. With Taiwan, it was temporary. They tried again at the beginning of the 1980s, and we had to stop them again. With Korea, it was permanent. Why? With South Korea, it was permanent. Why? Because we continually made the argument, if there's ever a nuclear exchange on the Korean Peninsula, that's the end of Korean civilization. And that went to their hearts. They could not accept any situation that seriously risked the end of Korean civilization. That same situation is what we find ourselves with in North Korea today. They're looking for economic opening, being treated as a normal country, and some kind of security guarantees. And they're very vulnerable to that argument. We don't want to risk the end of Korean civilization. I do not offer that as a panacea or as a high probability hope, but I mention it as the only path. Maybe it's a 30% chance, but when you have a 30% chance of ending a threat of nuclear war, you take it. So the path to denuclearization is through making a deal that helps Kim Jong-un make this social transition. And then we try to offer the deal that we offered to South Korea, which is done in very tough terms. By the way, it's not a soft option. Again, I don't offer any assurance that the high probability of success. It's just the only path I see.
Thank you, Professor Overholt. So you raised an extremely important question that that if this is indeed the only path, that somehow a social transition in DPRK is a path to denuclearization, then how do we get to it? Do these social changes in North Korea that Professor Zhong was elaborating about, do they bring any hope or any direction that we should go for, or that we should try to help facilitate? Is that something that can be done by either U.S., China, or any of these countries, or do they have the incentive to do that? And I'm sure Jenny has put a lot of thought into this question. So the correlation between social changes, then the threat perception, and then the denuclearization process. So Jenny, please share with us your wisdom.
I get the easy question, right? Well, thanks, Yoon, and thanks to Professor Zhang and Professor Overholt. It's a great honor to be on the panel today. I think we've heard several points today that really kind of challenge conventional wisdom on North Korea, especially conventional wisdom in the U.S. about North Korea. I think the top three ones here are really, understanding that North Korean decision-making is actually dynamic. It's not static. We may not always understand the drivers of that decision-making, but we need to understand that changes are possible. And a lot of times in U.S. policy, we don't take that into account. I think the second one is that Kim Jong-un is not his father. He's not his grandfather. Both his father and his grandfather really forged their identities out of conflict, out of overcoming conflict and struggle and hardship in order to survive. That is not who Kim Jong-un is. He has no credibility in these areas as well. And so Kim Jong-un's message is very different, and is really building on his father's promise at the end of his regime of becoming a strong and powerful nation. And I think Kim Jong-un is really trying to build that expectation that North Korea can normalize and that they can achieve prosperity, not just survival. And at the same time, Kim Jong-un is not operating in a political vacuum. Like all leaders, there are also pressures to deliver on the domestic agenda. And especially, there are still constituencies in which he has to take into consideration, including the military and the elites. And as Professor Overholt was talking about, building expectation is a risky business. So what this means for a denuclearization process, I think there's a general narrative out there that talks about how, North Korea never intended to denuclearize. They went down this road in bad faith, and now we're seeing the fruits of that scheme going on. And I would beg to differ, because I think there's a lot of signs out there that North Korea was pursuing this, was willing to do stuff, maybe not all at once, for a lot of the reasons that have been talked about already, but certainly there was an opportunity there. And I think, first of all, you have to look at Kim Jong-un when he talks about what he's done so far and his perception of what North Korea has done so far to support diplomacy with the U.S. and South Korea. This is a larger universe than what the U.S. and South Korea actually perceive. And it's signaled a very big opportunity to move the relationship and agenda in a very drastically different way. And so, for instance, on the WMD side of the equation, North Korea did several things unilaterally outside of an agreement that includes a moratorium on nuclear and long-range missile testing, and for over a year didn't do any missile testing, including short-range ballistic missiles, and what we've seen now is medium-range ballistic missiles. It dismantled the Punggye-ri nuclear test site with outside observers. It began the dismantlement of the Sohae launch pad and engine test stand. It even offered to allow inspectors into such sites to verify those actions. And it has offered up the Yongbyon complex as a first step towards denuclearization. That was part of the offer in Hanoi. Externally towards South Korea, they allowed cultural exposures, K-pop concerts, different exchanges and sports exchanges. And even if this only affected the North Korean elites, it still spoke to a North Korean audience directly. He even allowed President Moon during the Pyongyang summit to address the North Korean people directly, even, again, if it was just a select crowd. And the last time we saw that a foreign leader was able to do this was back in 2013 when the Mongolian president Elbadorj addressed the crowd at Kim Il-sung University. And Elbadorj at that time proceeded to say that Mongolia is a country respecting human rights and freedoms, upholding rule of law, pursuing open policies. Freedom enables every human to discover and realize his or her opportunities and chances for development. This leads a human society to progress and prosperity. No tyranny lasts forever. It's the desire of the people to live free that is the eternal power. So in 2013, Kim Jong-un allowed the president, unscripted, to say these things. And the only direction he was given was don't say democracy and don't say market economy. So it's a big chance, a big risk, having President Moon address a North Korean audience again without pre-approving that script. He even took President Moon to Mount Paektu. And so they had the optic of them standing on this sacred mountain and the origin of the Korean people, basically holding hands and saying, we're going to build prosperity together. This was a very powerful optic, and one that really went against the narrative of the Juche ideology and of the self-reliance. In addition to that, they had started down the road of the Pyongyang Declaration, the Panmunjom Declaration, the Inter-Korean Military Confidence Building Agreement, and different sports and cultural exchanges. Externally towards the U.S., again, they provided all of these unilateral concessions. They also released U.S. detainees. They allowed a lot of publicity of the summits inside North Korea. But internally, you also have to look at what they did. They stopped a lot of anti-U.S., anti-South Korean propaganda. They discussed a commitment, Kim Jong-un himself discussed a commitment to denuclearization in his New Year's speeches. This is huge. For a country that wasn't intending to take these steps, this is not the narrative you would use. They discussed the summits, and in the case of Hanoi, usually these kinds of summits are not advertised in advance. It's not like here where you know every step the president's going to make and you start to build expectations of what they're supposed to get out of that. But in North Korea, they did that. They started to advertise the Hanoi summit, pre-Hanoi summit, and started to build these expectations that something was coming, that a breakthrough was coming. They moved away from the Byungjin policy and Songbun policies into an everything for the economy state policy. A lot of their economic policies allowed for experimentation and increased incentives to allow for greater autonomy of the people in the market spaces, where to be more profit-driven rather than a real command economy like in the state-owned enterprises. Instead of telling them what they had to make, how much they had to make, how much they had to pay, instead just giving them profit targets, and it was up to them to decide what they made, how much to pay people, and create these different incentives. And again, he's really worked to build this expectation that prosperity can be achieved. And so while the U.S. tends to focus only on the technical concessions on the WMD side that I mentioned at the beginning, talk about how it wasn't enough for Kim Jong-un to show that he was serious about denuclearization, they missed this larger narrative of how Kim Jong-un was actually laying the foundations domestically to take the country in a very different direction. But without tangible results after 2 years of diplomatic efforts, that domestic narrative becomes harder to justify, especially among the key constituencies, and especially among the military, who have experienced a decline in their prestige over time, and the elites. So a couple of things to note about this diplomatic process, and one of the key things is that North Korea's approach to external messaging is very new. And so you see all the statements coming out of North Korea these days, and everyone's trying to figure out what did this mean and what institutions do these people belong to. And this is generally how you could assess these things in the past. There was a hierarchy, and the issues were the statements were issued from institutions, and so it was easy to place that hierarchy on those institutions to figure out the weight of those statements, and did it really reflect North Korean policy. But North Korea has really adapted to Twitter and op-ed culture, and has really stripped away a lot of that rhetoric. So messages are now issued from individuals with very direct language, without all of the bombastic rhetoric that used to be that the message was couched in before. And now we have to question and be very careful of what weight do these messages actually have in this broader hierarchy? So do personal statements carry the weight of the institution? And do they represent policy, or is this just a tactic? And a lot of what you see now, to me, looks more like good cop, bad cop. It looks a little bit like, the differences between what you would hear from Bolton versus Pompeo about where we are in the North Korea issue versus what you would hear from Biegun. All very different messages. And again, even in the US, we're still trying to figure out which is actually reflective of US policy. So that institutional messaging system has changed. And also, I think we have to call into question, too, the institutional hierarchy as well. Is it really the same as it was under Kim Jong-il? Or, for instance, has the prestige of the foreign ministry moved up in hierarchy, which some signs would tend to reflect? So all of these are unclear, even if the language of the statements are more direct. And then what we also see is really a new approach to diplomacy itself. And so one of the biggest things we learned in Hanoi was that Kim Jong-un sees himself as the negotiator now for the nuclear issue. Some of the other issues he can delegate down to the working level to work out, but he's in charge of that technical discussion. And what this means is that the working level will never have the authority to say more or clarify more than Kim Jong-un already has. And so while the US keeps trying to bring the process back to a more normal working level negotiation process to get down to that granular level discussion, this is not going to work. And so instead, it's really going to be ineffective until a deal is signed for that 30,000-foot view of what this first offer is. And so once you've created the mandate, then you can push down to the working level to talk about the details of implementation. But until you get to that point, the working level is never going to be an effective way to do this under this current regime. So that doesn't mean you can't have negotiations outside of a summit process. And I think one of the interesting things that's happening now is this passage of letters. And we don't actually know what's in the letters between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, and I've heard some stories that sort of tend to not be substantive of what some of these are. But certainly it could be used in a more substantive way. So if Kim Jong-un is the negotiator, his working level isn't able to give the details of, for instance, what does Yongbyon mean? Does it mean the experimental light water reactor, the fuel fabrication facility, the 5-megawatt reactor, all of these facilities, or not? If you can't do that in a working level discussion, why aren't they writing that in the letter to Kim Jong-un to clarify? If we want to make a deal, we need clarity on these issues in order to make an appropriate reciprocal response. It's clumsy, for sure. But sticking to an approach that does not resonate with the North Koreans also gets us nowhere. So, these are unconventional times to begin with. This is not, the Trump administration has never been business as usual. So now that we have this opportunity, once we've seen the signs that Kim Jong-un is willing to do something very different, there is an argument to be made for approaching it very different as well. Some of what's at stake here, though, is that Kim Jong-un in this process has also been learning and potentially learning all the wrong messages. He's taken very big risks, very big calculated risks, tested the boundaries, and so far he can assess that his calculations have been right. So for instance, in 2017, 2016, 2017, during Fire and Fury, they were subjected to more sanctions, yes, and a lot of fury, but no fire. And so, he's seen Trump's aversion to war and conflict. He's, especially in the Middle East, he's seen Trump's justification for why he fired Bolton, which also included the idea that Bolton kept wanting to pull him into war. And it's entirely unclear now what U.S. red lines are, if the U.S. has red lines, or what the consequences of crossing those red lines are. And so what's at stake here is that there's a lot of room for miscalculation. If you have an overconfident Kim Jong-un, if you have a situation where now he needs to show to domestic audiences that they're a strong country despite not getting results from the US and despite not getting results from South Korea. And he thinks that the consequences of that are not going to be too severe. It may embolden him to do something that does cross a line and that does bring about more disastrous results. I think my final thought is really just that, there was a window open. It's still a little open. There is, a few more weeks until the end of the year. It's entirely unclear what that consequence, Kim Jong-un has talked about this end of year deadline for making progress because again, I think there's a lot of pressure under Kim Jong-un having taken such big risks on this issue to come up with results that would be tangible for the North Korean people to justify continuing moving in that direction. And if he can't do it, certainly he has to still come off with a strong showing. And you're seeing this domestically in North Korea. And I think this is part of the signaling with the missile tests going on, with the stronger language towards South Korea and Japan and the US, starting now with the US. But also the showcasing of the trips to Mount Paektu and the White Horse, and showing again that taking back that narrative of we're not building prosperity with South Korea, but we're doing it on our own. We can do it on our own. The showcase village of Samjiyon that was just revealed, progress on the tourist spots, showing that they're an advanced tourist culture, being able to accommodate more Chinese tourism, showing that they can still survive and prosper even under the conditions that they are. So the window for diplomacy certainly is a window and it can be shut. And it may take a long time before that window opens up again. And if it does, though, the price of everything will have gone up. I'll leave it at that, on that happy note.
Thank you, Jenny, for that happy note. It's a vastly valuable assessment of the negotiation process and where we are. I think there are a lot of agreements here, at least among the speakers, that in terms of North Korea, their domestic politics, the leader is facing some really difficult decisions and dilemmas. That it seems that the situation is very difficult to move, and I'm sure everybody is curious what the Christmas gift really constitute and what might happen. I have a lot of questions, but I would like to give the time to the audience to ask you a question, and I would like to ask you to identify yourself, not to make a statement, and limit your question to only one, if I may. Well, Professor Yao, please. I'm sorry, here, in the front.
Oh, Andrew Yao, Associate Professor. Andrew Yao, Associate Professor at... Thank you.
Sir, it's
Andrew Yao, Associate Professor at Catholic University. My question is for Professor Zheng. I was curious if you could share with us your thoughts from a Chinese perspective on what the Chinese government or the Chinese people think about markets or marketization in North Korea, and how much the sanctions are still in place, but what we hear is that transactions across the border are more fluid than they were in the past. So what is the Chinese perspective on markets and marketization in North Korea?
Yes, thank you very much for that very good question. I think that for Chinese perspective, from Chinese perspective, I think that the market activities and the market in North Korea, I think that it is very, very helpful for North Korean society and economic development. As we think that, because as we know, we have no many methods to approach and to access deep market now. And because as you know, China has many, from the surface we can see that China has many methods to approach and to access deep market. But these methods are all kinds of the military ways or some kind of the political ways. but we cannot use that to solve the small. We think that big and huge methods cannot solve the small problems in DPRK. So we cannot use that. So we can use some soft and less hard ways to access and to approach the DPRK and to solve the problem. We think that the market and the activities in the DPRK can really solve the real problems of Kim Jong-un and of DPRK, such as they should feed their people and they should live better. You should from the markets. You cannot get more from the nuclear tests and such weapons. So we think we think that is a better way to let North Korean to know that you can get into the international society and to be one member of the international community. So this is the market activities are the better ways.
And that's the dominant thinking in China about markets in North Korea?
Well, if I may just add to that, I think even starting from the years under Kim Jong-il, the Chinese have been preaching North Korea that look at the China model, that you can maintain your basically authoritarian rule with the economy, with economic development, with reform and opening up. So since starting from early 2000, the Chinese have been consistently inviting North Korean leaders to visit China and to see the China model and try to replicate that experience in North Korea. So in my experience, that is China's dominant thinking. But whether that's in violation of UN sanction resolution, that's a different question. Yes, the gentleman in the back, please.
Dan Lieberman. As mentioned before, North Korea went to its nuclear developments because it felt a threat, and therefore the only compromise it will do denuclearization is by getting rid of the threat. But we've introduced sanctions, and we want to trade sanctions for denuclearization, but that only puts North Korea back in square one, and they're still left with the threat. So isn't sanctions a non-starter? Shouldn't we do away with the sanctions before anything else is done? And just a minor question, Kim Jong-il seems to, like our own president, insult other leaders. He's insulted the leader of Japan, and now he's called President Trump a tired old man who does nothing but tweet. I don't see, how does that help them? Why is he doing things like that? It doesn't seem to make much sense to me.
And the question is for
Anyone.
I don't think you get anywhere on denuclearization by immediately getting rid of sanctions. The deal has to be we get rid of sanctions in return for denuclearization, but we make peace, and along with Russia and China, provide security guarantees so that they can afford denuclearization. Sanctions are by themselves completely ineffectual, as we've discovered over a period of well over a decade, but they are their inhibition of Kim Jong-un's desperate need for economic development is the reason why he's motivated to denuclearize. The mistake we make is not having sanctions. The mistake we make is thinking that sanctions will be effective without a peace understanding. He'd be absolutely nuts to give up his nuclear weapons without having firm security guarantees, and not just from us. It has to be underwritten by China and probably Russia too. Like him, we are too unreliable to do a deal. We have to have Chinese and Russian co-signatures.
I mean, there are no simple answers here. It isn't just a matter of sanctions or security guarantees. If you look at the Singapore summit, this is very much how the North Koreans think about a denuclearization process, that the road to denuclearization is paved with developing a fundamentally different political relationship. As Professor Overholt talked about, is that you can't get to the end of the road without these other things being in place. The problem is you can't get to the end of the road quickly either. It's just not possible. There's too much history here. There's too much mistrust here. And that's even what's been sort of hindering the process now, is that the U.S. approaches this because there's so much mistrust as saying we need a guarantee of the end of the road, an agreement on the end state, because we don't trust we'll get there otherwise if we just talk about it in phases. Whereas the North Koreans look at it the opposite way. Because of the mistrust here, we're only willing to talk about this first phase and test it out and see if we can make any progress in order to see if a second phase is even possible. And so it's always been a matter of sequencing and how far you're willing to go. And the U.S. doesn't have great credibility on being able to maintain multilateral agreements past administrations. And so the North Koreans also know that, where, because U.S. is a democratic society, because South Korea is a democratic society, in order to have the confidence that they can get to the end of the road, they're going to need to see some political sustainability of a policy beyond one administration. And so far, like I said, we haven't had a good track record of that. The insults back and forth, of course, these are all tools. Some of it is in response to what they consider to be insulting. Some of it is sort of tactics of, you see a lot of frustration right now. So when there was great optimism that the process could still move forward and that there was something sort of on the horizon, you didn't see the insults going back and forth. Now that you see the frustration, you see basically North Korea's already kind of written off South Korea because they see that South Korea can't move forward on the agenda without cooperation from the U.S., and they're not getting the cooperation from the U.S. And you see this end-of-year deadline looming, and the U.S., basically needing a fundamentally different approach in order to meet that deadline. How likely that is not very high right now, given the 2 weeks left before Christmas. And so you do see that frustration building. And so part of their negotiating tactics and part of what they consider to be kind of hardline tactics is also including insults, because in North Korea, for instance, insulting the leader is the highest insult that you can do. So this is all just part of the negotiation process. Is it the most helpful or most effective? No, of course not. But that doesn't mean they won't use it.
Yes, I think that kind of the denuclearization in the Korean theory is some kind of the process, then such as the result. I think Kim Jong-un wants some kind of a debit card, not a credit card. I think that, yeah.
So debit card with cash in it.
Yeah.
Not the credit card, which can be stopped. Okay. The gentleman over here.
Hi, I'm John Pollan. I'm a marketing analyst for a defense contractor. First of all, thank you to all the panelists for it was a marvelous discussion. I learned a lot. For Professor Overholt, I'm interested in your comment about Russia as a potential future signatory on an agreement. And what's your thoughts about their level of interest, their level of energy, their level of concern about the situation, and then how might they be integrated into future discussions?
Just to tag along on Russia, do you think that Japan will also have to be a signatory in that process? Otherwise, it will be 3-2.
Yeah. Russia's a tiny player compared with China. I think that's the foundation of your question. The Russians are extremely interested. They see building pipelines and other things through North and South Korea to the Pacific as the key to their Asian strategy. So the important, once you get the U.S. and China both providing security guarantees, you've got a lot. It's very helpful to have the Russians on board. Once you get the others on board, and obviously South Korea has to be there from the beginning, then I think you drag the Japanese kicking and screaming into it. But the last thing Japan wants is a Korean peace deal. They see these two very hostile countries because of the revisionism in Japan. South Korea, North Korea, and China are going to be quite hostile as long as that policy lasts. And the possibility of their North and South Korea coordinating on their hostility to Japan is just intolerable to the Japanese. So the Japanese are going to be an obstacle to any peace, which means they're an obstacle to denuclearization. It's ironic because that's against their long-term interest. But once there's a deal that they can't stop, they will join and then they'll become a big economic contributor. So that's the sequence I see.
I would just add to that. I don't think the Japanese are necessarily against a Korean peace deal. I think they're against a deal where they have no voice in the process. But I think all the countries are. China's also against a deal where they don't have a voice in the process. Russia's also against a deal where they don't have a voice in the process, because having a Korean peace deal basically recalibrates the whole Asian security dynamic. And so, everyone has a stake in it. The question is who belongs as a signatory or not, and that's really arbitrary, and that's something for the parties to decide. But in that process, by leaving any of them out of the consultations at the very least, where they might not have to be an actual signatory, but as long as their voice is somewhere carried in that process, I think everyone is generally for a Korean peace deal. But they're very nervous of what that unified Korea would be and where its alliances would fall. I think the Japanese are very concerned if you have a Korean peace deal that they would align with China. The Chinese think they'll align with the U.S. And I've even heard some Japanese, Korean ethnic Japanese who say that the Korea should reunite and then build an alliance with Japan against both the U.S. and China. So there's all kinds of configurations that could happen. But certainly there is, all of them have a stake in this process. So anytime you leave any of them out, whether in, at least in the informal consultations, you're going to have problems.
Well, we're at the end of our session, but before we conclude, I would like to ask our panelists a simple question. So if you have to assess, so for 2020, between the possibility of escalation of tension, the return to fire and fury, and the possibility of continued diplomacy, if you have to judge between these two likelihoods, like 40, 60, 50, 50, 30, 70, what your answer would be? Professor Zhong?
It is very low.
So low as what?
To come back to some kind of the 2017, the situation between U.S. and the DPRK, I think for Kim Jong-un, Trump also is some kind of the North Korea's chance. And for Trump, I think Trump will use Kim Jong-un and the DPRK nuclear issue to get something from his re-election.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to give a number, like 2080, 3070.
2080.
2080, so 20% of chance of a return to fire and fury, 80% of chance for the. Oh wow, that's a lot of confidence in diplomacy.
Yeah.
Great, that's the Chinese position. Professor Overholt.
I agree that the chances of a big return to fire and fury is very low. I think, as Professor Zhang suggested, I think Trump needs to have one foreign policy success. And he will push for that. He's only got one chance, and that's North Korea. And Kim Jong-un knows that Trump needs one foreign policy success, and he will make a huge effort to benefit from that and to try to do everything he can to get Trump reelected. So I think what's probably the lowest probability is the third possibility, that we actually get close to a real agreement. I mean, there are three options. One, continue diplomacy. Two, have some real success with that diplomacy. And three, go back to fire and fury. I don't think we're headed back to fire and fury.
Great, Jenny.
I'll be the outlier here. And I think the chances of having a very provocative early of the year is more like 70-30. If you look at the signs that the way that North Korea has approached this issue over the past 6 months, the increasing missile tests, the increasing demonstrations of power, the way that they've turned on South Korea, very sharp, very aggressive turn on South Korea, and the repeated warnings about this end of year deadline, I think, one, they have to do a big show if this deadline passes. How long that lasts, I don't think it'll last long, but they have to do something big. And how the U.S. responds to that is, only Trump knows. So, I think there is reason to be concerned that North Korea will be provocative over the next couple of months. But as Professor Zhang has said, there is a lot at stake also now for North Korea that they would lose if this actually escalates into something like what we saw in 2017. So I would say like 70-30 for the aggression, at least in the short term. But I don't know how long that would last.
Yeah, we need to refine the question. I think there's less disagreement here than appears, because I would agree that the next phase has to be more confrontational. If you put a date of July on it, then I don't think we're going to be on the verge of war in July.
I see. So in the short term, we're going to see some provocation
Yeah,
and
okay.
confrontation, but
It's hard for us to
The Christmas gift.
get something.
but by the time of the election, it should have stabilized. Okay, well, with that, we conclude today's session. Thank you very much for coming, and please join me in thanking our panelists for a great discussion.
I officially nominate Jenny Town for next envoy to South Korea. I think that was the most eloquent presentation I've heard. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I would love it.
See if I. First of all, get rid of this.